Ready? Okay. Hello? I think this needs to go higher. Can you lift it up higher? JC's after me too. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Is that good? Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. And we want to thank Central Oregon Health Council. This is the land acknowledgement that they have before each session that we do with the substance abuse workflow group. And so we want to thank Central Oregon Health Council also for helping us be here today. We recognize and acknowledge the indigenous land on which we live, work, learn, play, and grow. This is the land of the Warm Springs, Wasco, Northern Paiute, Taninu, Klamath, Molalla, and Yahuskin. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. It is on their traditional land where we partner to improve the health and well-being of Central Oregonians. We aspire to be good guests, honoring the concept in Warm Springs culture. This land is for you to know and live upon and pass on to the children. So with that, I'd like to have our first speaker. His name is John Charles. John is just an amazing human being. He is in the Football Hall of Fame for Portland State, All-American. Let's see. John has just overcome against all odds. So you're going to hear a story of resilience and of power and of beauty. John is an entrepreneur. He is a lover. He's a visionary. He is a very intelligent and a wonderful friend. And he started his own company. It's called, it's a barbecue sauce, which we can give you the URL if you guys want to buy barbecue sauce for family gifts. I could just go on and on and on, but I'll let him share his story. So thank you, John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. I'll bend on you. She said a lot of nice stuff. I'm paying her to say all that. So my name is John. Like I said earlier, come from East Palo Alto, which is next to Palo Alto. They called it hell on earth, a mile away from heaven. And it was 2.5 miles of terror, gang infested. You saw people get beat, women were second class, and obviously as a race, being black in that area was second class. If you called Domino's back then, they didn't deliver. There were no banks, there was nothing. And so the only way to get out was through drugs, or you were stealing, right? And so for me, in the 80s, my father, I grew up, for my father, my real father, he was addicted to drugs more than he, loved me. My mom was a career thief, and then my stepfather, who pretty much raised me, was an abuser. And so he was the womanizer, he was the guy that everyone loved in public, but when he came home, it was different. And so for me, I got to see how people's energies changed quickly. As soon as he walked in the door, it was gonna look, and if he looked like things were okay, then I stayed out. If he looked like things were gonna be bad, then I went into my room. And so because it was such a drug-infested area, my family happened to be one of those that introduced drugs to the community. And so our house was always that house that people kind of came and got, busy. And usually it happened at 1 a.m, 2 a.m. And so my room and my space was the one thing that I could control. And so I was the type that would go to bed and get up at 1 a.m, make the bed back up, get back in it, and go to sleep, right? And so it was more of an OCD type behavior. But I didn't realize that as a kid, and you're watching all of that abuse, that it was something that it was like a coping mechanism. And so everyone I felt was addicted to something, and mine was more food, anything crunchy, I could drink sweets to bring it down, right? And so after going through that, my father eventually contracted AIDS through using heroin, and he was the guy that was the drug tester. So it was marijuana. He tested it, said if it was good or not, and then produced, gave it to the community. Eventually, the drugs were so, it didn't do enough that he graduated to heroin. When he started doing that, he started taking needles from his mom, my grandmother, because she was diabetic, and he would, shoot up in the veins and then eventually start shooting in his feet. And so he shared that needle with his friends too. And so when he contracted AIDS in the 90s or in the 80s, we didn't know if you got AIDS through monkeys, if you got it through sex, if you, hugs, kissing, we had no idea. So like COVID is today, that's how it was for AIDS. And so I wasn't sure if I could hug him, how was it gonna get, transferred? And I was 18 at the time when I found out that he had it. And so to see him go through that, and then to look back at all the times when he was asking for help, I kind of absorbed some of that guilt. And so dealing with my father's side, that was tough. Well, then my mom, she was a career thief, and she could walk in here and look at the coffee creamers and just take a couple home just because she wanted to. That was her, right? And so for me to go through that manipulation, see that type of manipulation day in and day out, I became really good at watching and looking at others, and if someone manipulated me, then that was a turnoff, right? I could just switch it off like a light. And so I had to deal with that dynamic. And then the biggest dynamic was my real father, or my stepfather, the one that was the abuser, the one that would do the hitting, at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, the person that had drug dealers coming to our house shooting silencers because they were looking for him, right? The one that when we would go out in public, he would have other mistresses and kids that are the same ages as us, right? And so my mom tolerated that, but I dealt with that as a kid. And so as he would beat my mom and I'm hovering over her to try to protect her, I would get bruises, but I never saw those as a third grader. The only time I found out that I had it is when I would go to class and the teacher's like, hey, what's that bruise? And so then that's when I learned how to become a chameleon and come up with reasons after reasons for adults who are supposed to be like, people that I'm looking up to. And so I would tell that teacher, oh, shoot, that came from a bike. I fell off my bike yesterday, right? And I didn't even have a bike. But those were the things that I was doing to cover up for the family abuse. And so as I got older, I had a bunch of friends who, either was drug dealers, getting killed, and then the ones that did the killings would go to prison. So I was losing friends both ways. And so I never really let people get connected to me. And so for my mom, she's looking at me and she's going, you're next. You're next to go to the grave, because I lost so many friends at that time. And so she tried to do the right thing by getting me to go out to an area where it was predominantly white in the Silicon Valley. It's called Mountain View. And so Monday through Friday, I would sleep on my aunt's couch and then come home for the weekends. Well, during that time, I would go do that, but I didn't really have an identity, because remember, I was that chameleon. And so I realized, okay, if I can get on the bus at 5 in the morning and go to school, I'll figure out how to roll my pants up and how to talk differently, right? More proper than what we were used to talking about in East Palo Alto. And so I became that chameleon. I didn't have an identity at all. And so I realized that if I could go from East Palo Alto to Mountain View, I couldn't let Mountain View see that I was East Palo Alto. After school, if I was going back home, I couldn't let home see that I was just at a white school, right? So either way, I was gonna get it. And so for me, when things started to turn around, I was really, really good at sports, or throwing a football, that is, and was able to latch on and play, football at that time. And so no one told me that your grades are cumulative. So from a freshman to a senior, no one told me that they add all of that up. So here I am, a class clown as a freshman. I'm walking in singing Phil Collins, and they're looking at me like, no one should be singing Phil Collins, especially a black guy, right? And I would have the hook down and have the class laughing, but I was always the guy that was getting in trouble, right? If it was in Spanish, then the teacher's looking at me, and Juan Carlos, that was my Spanish name, Juan Carlos? And I'd look back as everyone's laughing, and then she'd just check me off, a quick F for that day. And so when I started to become really good at football and used that as an avenue to get out of East Palo Alto, by the time I was a senior, I was an All-American, and that was like the #1 quarterback in the country for that position. Well, they started to add up my grades, and they said, well, you did something bad as a freshman. And I'm going, wait a minute, what do you mean? Cal, Stanford, right? Oregon State, Oregon. What do you mean? You're adding up my freshman year. No one told me that. Right? I'm getting a 3.2, 3.4 as a senior. And so I had to go to a junior college. And that was the time when my father had just passed, and that was the time when I learned that that it was AIDS, right? So it was really, really hard for me to see and go through all of that at that time. And so I ended up having to go to junior college for a couple of years, got an AA degree, and then was fortunate enough to go to Portland State University. And as a black quarterback, there was only 4 at the time: Doug Williams, Vince Evans, Randall Cunningham, and Rodney Peete, right? And so for me to be African American, left-handed quarterback, I didn't run that fast, right? I broke all the norms. And so I lost a lot of opportunities. And back then they didn't have social media where you can just look at a video really quick. It was something that they had to get on a flight, get a hotel, get a rental car, come and see you. And once they saw you, then it was like, oh, he's not what we thought, right? So I had to deal with the racism. And so I'm dealing with racism, I'm dealing with loss of friends, I'm dealing with family members, I'm dealing with my identity, and that was a lot to take on. But that stress, I took it inward and just put it out on the football field. And so me coming to Portland State University was the biggest opportunity for me. I became the student body vice president. I took football a little more serious. I had the opportunity to go into the NFL. And then unfortunately, I broke my left wrist as a quarterback, and so that sidelined me, and I had no identity. Again, not sure of what I was gonna do, no plan B. Well, in a nutshell, I ended up homeless, eating cereal with water, taking showers with dish soap, living with 3 other guys, no heat, right? Eating rice with soy sauce, oatmeal, just the bare basics. And then had an opportunity again to go into arena football, and then I was injured again with my right shoulder. And again, no identity, not sure of who I am, where I'm gonna go. And so I started trying to get into different things like working the title, working with people's money, working in insurance, doing loans, real estate. And then I really found the thing that I love doing, and that was working with kids. And so I did that check mark, and I was like, okay, let me work with kids, but I wanna work with them where they're like having to work off some restitution and I have to report to a probation officer. But that wasn't fulfilling for me. It wasn't enough. And so I said, let me go work at McLaren Youth Corrections, and that's in Woodburn. And those kids have long-term sentences. Kip Kinkle, was on my caseload, the kid at Thurston High School. Seth Cook here from Redmond, the Redmond 5, was on my caseload. And these are kids with life. And so while working in that institution, a lot of those staff members had some racism, because if you were there for 20 years plus and you're behind those walls and you're working shifts and you're doing overtime, you're locked up just like the kids. And so me coming there, my boss was the head of the Gypsy Jokers bike gang, but he was always cool with me. You never knew that he had that racism. But when he hired some of his gang members in, those were the ones that I had problems with. And so they would write racist emails, do racist taunts, say a lot of things to me, and I would try to take that through my channels of operation. Well, going through that, again, person, no identity, come through abuse, seeing manipulation, seeing death, seeing people get locked up, a lot of scars were there that I had never really dealt with. NFL was over with, right? Still signing autographs, homeless, you know what I mean? And so I didn't really know who I was. Well, being at that prison, I got along with a lot of the kids. And so I learned Spanish, I was bilingual, I could go touch all the different types, sex offenders, violent offenders, drug and alcohol, every kid you named, I was able to touch those guys, and there were 382 inmates. Well, one of these evenings, they had a cell extraction where we had a kid in a cell, and long story short, he refused to come out. Well, we had to put the riot gear on and go in and get this kid. And I was one of those guys with the shield and the body armor, and we're marching to his thing. Well, after that, I ended up tearing a ligament in my thumb because of the shield handle. And so they had to put a plate in. Well, I was arrested at work because the urine that kid threw on me dripped and it landed on him. Whatever cocktail he had in his toilet that he threw on me because I was the first person in, hit him. And so that put me at home, put me in front of a racist judge in Salem who said guilty because I had a lawsuit out dealing with the racism. So again, all of that trauma that I went through, I was still resilient enough to say, you know what, I'm gonna overcome all of this. So I went home, had the surgery, had a cast on, and I said, Lord, I'm not gonna move until you tell me exactly what it is I'm supposed to do. So I started working with kids, check. Football, check. In Vancouver, Washington, check. How much am I going to charge? It's going to be free, check, right? And so I started taking my very first kids and created this company called Air One Football Academy. Well, I was like, well, you know what, I'm going to do Air 14 because my jersey number is 14. And so I looked it up and just had a vision and said, you know, I'm going to do this and it's going to be across the country, so let me look this up, this name, because I don't want to get embarrassed later for having it. So I found a name in Texas. Kyler Murray, the kid that played last night, his father owned Air 14 back then. So I had to drop the 4 off and I called it Air 1. And so that's how it was born. And so I took my very first kids and did it for free. They were shocked that this NFL quarterback is helping them for free. Well, then I learned how to ask for $5, then 20, then 80, then 125, right? And so 12 years later, that business had been born. And so some people say, well, what brought you to Prineville? Well, I was always having kids come from all over the country to come to Portland and train. Well, Brett Edgerly from Prineville Funeral Home kept bringing his son. He'd drop him off for 1 hour and then leave. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. You drive 3 hours for 1 hour training and then you drive 3 hours back. What's the deal? And so he bust my bubble because I was out there. I was like, man, this is great. I'm John Charles. I'm football. I'm coach. And he said, John, I'm just dropping bodies off at the airport. So he would drop his son off, drop a body off at the Portland airport, pick his son up, come back. So I'm like, where do you live? Prineville. And he said, Les Schwab. Like Les Schwab is just going to tell me all about the town, right? You know what I mean? Like, I nodded with him like, oh, yeah, okay, Les Schwab, right. The guy that gives you the beef. They run in the car. So I ended up coming to Prineville and fell in love because we hunted, hiked, fished all in the same day. And once I got here, started working with EDCO, Economic Development for Central Oregon, internship coordinator here in Redmond, and then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, you know, I was like, man, I got to make money when I'm asleep. I got to figure this out. How am I going to make money when I'm sleeping? And so I had this barbecue sauce, created it, called John John's Barbecue Sauce. It's in 23 stores. And so I've been able to manage that by the grace of God. Treatment aide at Rimrock Trails, board member, if some of you guys have seen me with the Fathers Group, budget committee to be city council in Prineville, and then found SriPonya, and I just fell in love with these people because the mission speaks to me, where it's about love and being kind, sharing, caring. You know, as long as no one's covering our mouth and knows at the same time we have a chance at life, right? And so to follow these two, to watch these two, took a while because I came from no trust, manipulation, no love, right? And so I had to watch. And when I watched how they treated each other and then watched how they were around their own people in a group, you know, I was like, this is what I want to be a part of. And I've learned a lot because just because they're in your circle doesn't mean that they're in your corner. I've had a lot of people in my group, and I've watched people be in my boat and we're rowing, and then I look back and I'm thinking we're all going in the same direction and are drilling holes, right? And so I want everyone with oars, and I want everyone trying to go in the same direction, and that's what they've been able to provide and be able to show me. And so it's a pleasure being up here. It's a pleasure to share my story. And again, I'm a sponge, and I want to learn from everyone. I want to learn from all of you, and I'm very, very excited about the direction that this is all going. So, thank you.
Okay, we love you, John. John also is recovering. He's just recovering from breaking his back. So that's another area of recovery he can share, the resilience from coming back from breaking your back. Yes. Yeah. So, and he works with youth amazingly. And so we hope to launch some youth programs with John leading us. So thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. And next, I'd like to introduce Hailey Devlin. Hailey has over 7 years of recovery from alcohol and drugs. And she's a yoga teacher. She's got so many certifications. She started her own recovery community online for women or people who identify as women. And she's taken really on the embodiment of recovery. She's going to talk about, she's a somatic coach, sober coach, and a yoga teacher, and she's really got some specialty in this area of learning how to really come into your body. And she's also got special teachings from how to recover from trauma. So she's trauma informed. And so if you want to pull your chair up, and then Greg, you want to move the microphone so it...
Got it.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me? Is that working? No. Closer.
We're not putting it into the room.
Oh, it's just for this. Okay, got it. Okay, cool. Okay, I'll try and talk loud. When I get nervous, I can be quiet, and I'm nervous, so I'll try and use my voice. If you can't hear me, just let me know. Yeah, my name's Hailey, and I'm really grateful to be here this morning, and to be part of this community building and this work. I grew up in the Bay Area, and I grew up in an alcoholic home. And so drinking and drug use was all very normal to me, actually. And I remember being in my early 20s and like knowing that I had a drinking problem, but also just kind of like assuming that that's how everybody else moved through the world. And so like that's just like what I was going to also do. And I was pretty high functioning for a period of time. My drinking and drug use started when I was around 15. I managed to get through college. I was living in New York City. And my substance use was really skyrocketing. I would also do this thing where I would be like, oh, okay, drinking's the problem here, so I'm just going to stop drinking and I'll start, taking pills instead. And then the pills would become a problem, so I'd be like, okay, I'm going to stop the pills, I'm going to do cocaine instead. The cocaine would become a problem, and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to switch to opiates. And so I would do this back and forth thing, and because I could quit a substance for a period of time, I really kind of like convinced myself that it was like okay what I was doing. And then eventually I found heroin and meth, and those were the substances that became, really like dear loves for a long period of time, and I couldn't quit them. And in the period of time that those were my drugs of choice, I wound up just living on the streets, and I would panhandle for money, and I really assumed that was the way that I was gonna die. And for a period of time, I actually was pretty like accepting of that. Eventually I had a dear friend who we had grown up together who had also kind of gone down a similar path as me, and he overdosed twice in 1 week when we were together, and usually I was the one that was doing that. And so to be on the other side of that, and to watch somebody that I loved so dearly having this experience, it like cracked something open in me. And suddenly, where I had once kind of been like, I don't really care if I die, I was like, oh my God, I actually like desperately want to live. I want this person to live. I want to live. And I knew that if that was going to happen, that I was going to have to get sober. I had also been in and out of outpatient programs over the years. I'd gone to methadone clinics. I had there was some part of me that wanted to quit, but there was a much larger part of me that was like, I have no idea how I'm supposed to live without drugs. Like, I just didn't know how you do that. And so I had gone kind of like in and out of those programs, not really taking them seriously, not even really staying for that long, but I would like lie to my family and say that I was doing it because I just wanted them off my back. And so there were so many, ways that my addiction was manifesting, and parts of me that were trying to figure it out, and then larger parts of me that just had no idea what to do and felt like the resources that I was receiving or moving towards weren't really serving. And then when my friend overdosed, that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. And so I had a kind of couple months of a pretty intense run, which I won't go too much into, but all to say that eventually I bought like Suboxone off the street, and I weaned myself off of heroin just with the help of 12-step community, honestly. And I had been introduced to 12-step communities over the years, and I had always kind of gone and felt judgmental or like, oh, these people are different. I looked for the differences, and that's something that we learn in 12-step is like, look for the similarities, not the differences. I spent a lot of years looking for the differences. And by the time I hit my bottom, I was just so desperate that I was open enough to be like willing, and I was humbled by the experience that I had had. And so I started going to meetings. Those people helped me get clean, helped me stay clean, still support my recovery today. And that was kind of the beginning of my sobriety. I've been sober now for almost 8 years. And I honestly can't imagine another way of living. Like, I sometimes will laugh because if you had told me, 9 years ago that a sober life would be like, that I would be like deeply in love with being a sober person, I would have like laughed in your face and been like, that's not a thing. That can't be possible. I remember people would share in the meeting sometimes and be like, I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic, I'm a grateful recovering addict. And I would be like, grateful? Like, what do you have to be grateful for? Because I was just my insides were so dark, And so anyway, all to say that it's very possible to live a grateful, sober life. And I'm really committed to serving the recovery community because recovery communities have saved me. And I think that that's the beauty of so much of this work that we're all doing here, that we're doing in our own spaces, in our own communities, is that we are reestablishing support in a culture that is increasingly and has been so isolated in so many ways. And I know before I got sober and realized that there were sober people out there, like, I really thought that I was the only person who was having the experience that I was having. Like, nobody talked about addiction. Even though addiction was rampant in my family, it was like we swept it under the rug. We pretended that it wasn't there. There's so much shame and stigma in our culture around addiction. People think that addiction is the problem, but really addiction is the symptom of larger systems of oppression at play that are impacting us and have been for generations, and then that gets carried through generational trauma. And so it's just been so important to me as a person to reestablish that sense of connection and culture and community. And so the work that I do now is there's multiple pieces to it, but essentially one of the things that I realized as I was getting clean is that I had spent my whole life deeply disconnected from my body. And that's also something that systems of oppression do. Like, they thrive on disconnecting us from ourselves and from our relationships with spirit, with land. And so a huge part of my recovery has been reestablishing that sense of connection to my body. And that's really what somatics is about, if y'all haven't heard that word. Somatics comes from the Greek root soma, which means the living body in its wholeness. And so it's about rebuilding that connection. And yes, our physical body, but also how we are in relationship, one body to another body with each other, how we are in relationship to the body of the earth, how we are in relationship with whatever we understand as a higher power, because that is also in and through and all around us, right? So I established in the beginning of 2020 a online community for women identifying folks who are in recovery, and it's very much centered around embodiment. And it was a kind of a gap that I saw in recovery support and services. Somatics, in the way that I understand it, somatics can mean many things, and people kind of use that word a lot, so I'm just wanting to give a little bit of a background for clarity purposes, that somatics, as I've been trained and understand, is inherently trauma informed. And so we do a lot of trauma education. We do a lot of learning how to build safety in our nervous systems, a lot of nervous system repair. And we also do that work in relationship with each other, right? Because so much of our wounding and what brings us to a place of feeling like we need to use alcohol and drugs is that we feel deeply disconnected, or we don't know how to relate to one another. We don't know what it's like to be held, to be supported, to be cared for in the way that we all deserve. And therefore our wounding, our trauma becomes relational, right? And so then when we have to get sober and then like be in the world in relationship with other people, it's like that can feel so terrifying. And so a big part of the somatic work that I do is also about learning how to build these capacities to stay stay connected to our bodies when we're in relationship with each other, to stay, centered in our vision and in our values and what it is that we care about. So that's a big part of my work. And so I do that both in an online community and then also one-on-one with individuals. And somatics to me is inherently, like, almost in a way, I feel like somatics and recovery are kind of interchangeable because it's about a return to wholeness. And this just happens to be the approach that I take. And so it's been really transformative work because I also, a big part of it for me is that in my years of recovery, I spent a lot of time in the beginning. I was very lucky to be connected to community. And I spent a lot of time in the beginning doing this like individual work, like sitting in therapy, focusing on myself. And it wasn't until I got into somatics that I started learning from other people and other organizations that I began to realize that this hyper focus on the individual is actually part of the problem. Because our drinking and our drug use is a symptom, as I've mentioned, right? And so it's like, if we're not also addressing in somatics we call it like the sites that shape us, so historical forces, systems of oppression, larger social structures, if we're not addressing those pieces, then we're actually kind of missing the point. And then we're continuing to try to heal within these systems that are thriving off of our pain, essentially. And so that's been one of the big reasons that I've felt very in support of the work that SriPonya is doing, is because they're approaching the work with that understanding that we're like looking at these larger systems, how we rebuild community in the midst of that, how we build the kind of worlds that we actually want to be existing in, and dismantle these kind of like colonized capitalistic approaches to healing that we are all too familiar with and that really aren't working. And so I am really grateful to be here this morning to share a little bit about what it is that I get to do. I think before I got sober, I really had very little sense of identity and of purpose. And for anybody that may be like struggling with substance use or knows anybody, like knowing for me that was actually like I had to go through that to be able to get to do the work that I do today. And because I have lived it, I care so deeply about being able to be of service and support, because I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for other people providing recovery support. And so it's really just such a gift and an honor to get to do that and have it be this cyclical experience. So I think that probably feels complete for me. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Hailey.
Thank you, Hailey. Thank you for answering the calling. And if anybody there are some seats up here if people do want to come closer. And Hailey's Instagram, it's at Hailey Devlin, right? So the @ symbol Hailey Devlin. She has a really amazing Instagram profile, and like hear all kinds of things that are going on that she's doing, all of the workshops and things like that. So check that out. And next we want to hear from Jerek. He is native Central Oregonian. His list, as with all of these people up here on the board, we are so honored and humbled to have them as a part of this SriPonya collective. I mean, if I were to read their resumes, it would go on and on and on and on. Entrepreneur of the Year for Bend, TEDx talk, multiple companies that have been successful. And so he's an entrepreneur. He's also in the process of becoming, well, what is it that you become through the schooling that you're getting with the Tantra and Buddhism? Like, do you become a
registered teacher?
A registered teacher of the practice?
Yeah.
But just an amazing all-around human being in so many ways, so gifted, and we're so grateful to have him as a part of the SriPonya collective. And so, Jerek, Theo, Lovey.
So grateful to be here and so grateful to learn from JC and Hailey. I'm pretty new to somatics, but I can relate to the sort of disassociation that happens, as a result of colonization. And I know that Frank from the Warm Springs understands that better than anyone. I am trans, and it took me 38 years to come to an understanding of the core question that SriPonya asks, which is, who am I? And and it's been similar to what Hailey was saying, an essential journey for me. The struggle and the pain and the suffering of that, behind all of those dark nights of the soul, wondering, who I am and why I'm here and why I feel the way that I do, was a light. And that light, the more that I've been a part of the recovery process, continues to grow, and to experience that light, kind of what Hailey was saying about, you're grateful to be, how did you phrase it? Grateful to be sober. I continue to think about this for myself. It's how much alcohol or love or the various addictions or frequencies of addiction that have had a hold on my life, how much I thought that those meant to me, how much I craved, needed, wanted, and desired those things. They pale in comparison to the feeling of being alive and well and whole and happy. And so, may all of our lights just shine so brightly. I'm just so grateful to be a part of this community, and the dream is quite large, and it involves every single person in this room. The work that John Charles is doing, that JC is doing with youth, is, as we all know, an important piece of this puzzle. It's not just about adults in recovery, it's about the young people that are so sensitive, so tuned in, so alive, so innocent, so pure, and needing, wanting, seeking mentorship, guidance, friendship, love, appreciation, softness, gentleness, kindness from all of us. And so you'll hear, Jen and Greg share more, and JC share more in the future about what the SriPonya youth programs will look like. But I just want to plant that seed now, that we all are sparks for our young people in our community. It's really exciting to think about what that might look like. Imagining just with this group of people in the room, if each of us were a wise friend that showed up with encouragement and big, warm, open arms, reminding young people that it's okay to be exactly who they are, authentically them, and expressing that totally, honestly, transparently, beautifully, radiantly them. My folks came today. They're the reason I'm they're the greatest gift in my life. I was adopted when I was a baby, and I had this question and this story. I created this story in my life, I was given away. And recently, I've come to this understanding that I was gifted and I was received. With arms wide open, with hearts so pure and sincere and devoted to one another and to our family. So, Mom and Dad, I love you. And I'm so grateful you're here. They're my rock. And so I hope as well that as we begin to grow this community, which is launching today, that we begin to build bridges between communities, between veterans. Thank you so much for being here, for serving, for risking your life, for honoring yourselves. Thank you, Frank, for saying yes to being in places that traditionally have oppressed, robbed, stolen. You mean everything to us. You're our grandfather. We have such beautiful work ahead as a community to continue building bridges with the warm springs, with the rural communities, with people who are poor in spirit, who are feeling weak, who are feeling wounded, who have experienced trauma and pain and injustice, cruelty. We are experiencing division right now. And behind that darkness is a light, and that light will grow as we learn to forgive, as we learn to say, I'm sorry for hurting you. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. I've got your back. The LGBTQ youth, the Two-Spirit youth in the Warm Springs will be a really essential, integral part of our mission, the SriPonya mission, of our outreach services and programs. We would love for you to be involved as allies, as friends, as mentors, as coaches, teachers. We would love to create books, programs, classes, courses, workshops, retreats. So if you know, feel, are tuned into where we might hold those, how we might hold those, what that could look like, how we get this whole community lit up, how we create a model for Central Oregon, for the country, for the world, and we expand this new consciousness that's emerging, that we're all feeling, that we're all experiencing. It's not SriPonya, it's God. It's life, source, emerging, living through us, breathing through us, speaking into our hearts, reminding us, as Frank likes to say, that God is red. We all bleed the same color. We're all the same inside ourselves, the source within, the light within. Let us shine. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jen, for being champions of this cause. Where would we be without you? I can't even imagine. May you be blessed. May SriPonya prosper. May you live long, happy, healthy lives. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Larry. We love Jerek, and so we too want to adopt him into our soul family. The good thing is there's so much of all of us that like love is infinite, and it's an infinite resource that we can tap into, and so we can share it with everybody. We don't have to be like, no, that's mine. No, there's more of that, and my dear sweet Greg is teaching me that, because that's part of the journey we've been on, is learning how to share the unconditional love that we've cultivated in ourselves, between us as a couple, and then to share that out into the world. And I was really possessive for the first couple of years. I still can be possessive, and that's been part of my spiritual growth and in relationship, is that the love that we cultivate in our families, in our relationships, in our is meant to be shared. It's meant to be shared and given out. And we are so grateful, we are so blessed, we are so humbled, and we are so honored that, yes, our, I guess, can I call you grandfather too? No, you're not quite a grandfather for me. But that my friend Frank Smith has, he is an advisory board member. We keep trying to get him on as a board member, but for now, he's an advisory board member, and we're humbled and grateful for that. And so without further ado, Frank Smith.
Morning, everyone. I just was some thought about what's going on in our world today. We had this was some years back. This native person's passed now, and they invited him. He was a spiritual leader for many people on this continent, many tribes, and they invited him to the World Council meeting, and they wanted him to speak there. And all these people from all the different parts of the world were there, and all these world powers were there, like China, Russia, the United States, Europe, Australia, South America, Canada. They were all there, and they all were participating and talking about what was going on. And some of the topic was about the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb, and what the world was going to do about that stuff. So after they gave all their presentations, he got up, and they were asking him to speak, and he talked about the fire. He said, there's 4 holy powers in this world. It's fire, it's air, and it's water, and the earth. You take any of those 4 away, we'll go away. We'll be gone. Those are the 4 holy powers that make us exist. And he said that. He says, I don't know what these scientists were thinking of when they got that tiny little fire, and they got that atom. He said, I don't know what they were thinking of when they put it in them, and they dropped them on them people. Mass killed a lot of people. He said he doesn't understand that. Why a person in their mind would do something that to another race of people. he couldn't comprehend that. He said that our fire that we get from the sun and from the earth that comes and makes fire for us, he said we put it down and we pray for it. And it comes to us. We pray to all the directions, all the holy powers, and we light that. And he said, and that fire comes alive. And he says, and then we put our stone people on there. And we put the wood on there, sacrifice their life. And he says, then we go and we have a ceremony with that, with the holy herbs and all of life. All of life is with us. And we pray for one another to make this a better world to live in. He said that. And then when you pray like that energy from that light goes out from them stone people, goes into people's hearts, into their minds, into their bodies, into their souls. And it cleanses and purifies them, gives them a new start, teaches them to live healthy and be strong and love one another and to give. He said, that's how I understand the fire. I don't understand this fire that's really violent. And when he talked, they said that place where that World Council was just totally quiet. You could just hear a pin drop. He was confronting the whole world on what they're doing. And we're still like that today. You know, then he talked to them about us as people, as human beings in this world. And there's documentations of that in Washington, D.C., where they don't even consider us human beings. You know, because we wore feathers, because we wore, buckskin, we wore our own regalia, and we sang our songs. But there's stories about that too. There's stories about how this world was created. And he talked about that too to them. He said this world was created. Grandfather created this world in the beginning. And he said the first one here was the water. It's already here. He said then the volcanoes started up. Started that fire, started blowing up, and started pushing, making the land, making the earth. And there was lava flowed down the sides of the mountains. He said, and that's what we use in the sweat lodge, is those stones. We don't call them rocks because they're healers. Well, you see lava rocks, they've got holes in them, right? That water, when it snowed on the mountains and it pushed that lava down on them rocks and made it into earth, made it into all kind of different rocks and stones. He said that stone that come out of there that was pushed out from the cold and the heat was all gray. It had no holes in it because it was healed. It was a healer. You probably read about stuff, the First Nations. That was the First Nation. And when we prayed to them, they were the first ones in the beginning that he created. And we take them into the sweat lodge and we pray with him. And when he made the world, he made the finned people, ones that live in the water. He made the feathered, the winged people that fly. He made the four-legged, the ones that walk on four legs, and the ones that have many legs. Then he made the two-legged last, because we're the caretakers of this earth. That's our responsibility to take care of all of life. And that's why we go into that sweat lodge and we pray. That sweat lodge is a frame and it's made out of willows. Represents the plant life. It's covered by animal skins, represents the animal life. And that fire's in the middle, it represents the sun and the fire that's inside our Mother Earth. then that water of life comes in there. Then he gives us, we put on our holy herbs when we pray and put that water on there. So all of life is with us, everything when we pray. Everything prays along with us because we respect all of life. And that's what he told us people over there. And that's been the way we were created and the way our languages are. In the beginning of time, grandfather give us a language, his own language. And the trees understand that language. The animals all understand that language, and all the plants, the earth, the rocks, the mountains, the sky, the heavens, the air, the water, they all understand God's language. We lost that. Human beings lost that connection with God. That's why we have churches. That's why we have synagogues. That's why we have religions, because we don't understand God anymore. We decided as human beings that we knew better than God, that we're going to form our own religion, like the Catholic religion, like the Chinese have Buddhism and Taoism, and all these others, the Hinduism, the Muslims. They all got their own religions today. And they all got their own languages, and they say, you have to speak this language, you have to do this, you have to do that. But they don't really have that connection with God. And God created that language. This man, there was a young man, he talked about this young man. He went to all these ceremonies when he was a kid. He vision quested. He would fast for 4 days, and he'd cry and pray with his grandpa and his dad, his uncles and aunties. And then he'd go back home. He'd go back with his people, and they would do the same things. They'd go to them ceremonies, and they would cry and pray, and they'd be real thankful. Then the next weekend would come around after they'd go to work and come back, and then they'd see men beating their women up, women beating the men up, drinking and fighting and running around on each other, committing crimes, stealing from each other and lying and cheating. He said, he's seen all this stuff. And it made him feel bad. He said, what am I supposed to do? He'd go to these ceremonies to do the same things. All these different natives have a lot of different ceremonies for different things. And it continued through his life. Then when he said he got to a teenager, we'll go back a little further. When he was a boy, the cavalry come after him. This is in the Midwest, in the Lakota country. They come after him to kill the firstborn children of the reservation, because they said that there was a spiritual leader born in their land that they knew of, and that they were there to take his life. That stuff wasn't going to happen. So his mom and dad took him out in the country. Once they took him out in that country, they had a bundle. They bundled him up. It was storming, just snowing really hard, blizzarding. They took him out. They said a prayer for him. They laid him beneath in some area where he was covered and he was protected from the wind and elements. And they walked back to their house. And here come the cavalry. Come in, they knocked the door down. They says, where you got a son? Where is he? We want to know where he's at. We need him. We want him now. They said, he's not here. We don't have no son. They looked all over for tracks because all the tracks were covered by the snow. That snow purifies and cleanses, right? So it was cleansing and purifying him, getting him ready for his journey in life. So when he grew up, they don't know what happened to him out there. But when he grew up around the wolves and the coyotes. He grew up around the deer, grew up around the elk and the buffalo. He grew up, and he was talking to everything. He talked to the stones, he talked to all those animals, and he talked to the sky, the sun, the moon. And they'd communicate and talk back to him. And he, one day, they looked over this hill, and he says, those four-leggeds told him, "That's your home down there." He said, "No, that's not my home." He says, "Yeah, that's your home. You got to go down there. That's your mom and dad down there." He says, "No, you guys are my mom and dad." They finally convinced him, and he went down there. He went in that home. He knocked on the door. His mom and dad opened the door. He was speaking another language. He wasn't speaking Lakota. He was speaking God's language to them. They didn't understand him, but all of life could understand him. Everything else could understand him in this world. The stones, the sky, the sun, the moon, all the animals and the plants, they all understood him, and the earth, the water. So they finally accepted him and that he was their son. So they raised him, and he said the hardest thing for him to do is he had to go to school. He had to learn the Lakota language, he had to learn the English language, and he had to learn other tribal languages. He said that was really hard. So then when he went to these ceremonies where he was telling you, where he was really frustrated with them because they didn't understand what he was talking about and what he seen in life. So his grandpa come by one day on a buggy. He says, "I'm going to a ceremony, grandson, you want to go?" I said, "I'll be the same thing." So he said, "Well, I'll go with you anyway." He jumped on a wagon with him, and they headed out down the road on a buggy and horses. And he said they went down quite a ways, about 4 or 5 hours down the road, and they finally came to this place where they were going to have that ceremony. Then he went in there, and sure enough, they lit up their sacrifice there, and they were praying with them, the light, and the plants, and they were taking care of themselves. And he says, "Oh no, the same thing's happening like before." He says they're going to all go out and they're going to treat each other bad, They're going to go out and hurt each other later. And they're just going to lie, be hypocrites to themselves. They're just going to destroy and hurt themselves and hurt others. And they're going to come back and act pitiful here again the next following week, probably. So after that, they sent a medicine around. He said they all partook of that medicine. He says when he ate that medicine, he ate it, and he said, "Geez, it tastes awful." He said, "Oh, terrible." He said, "I don't know, why would they make us eat this stuff?" So then the ceremony went on. Then pretty soon, the guy starts singing the songs. The guy starts singing a song. And he's looking at that man. He started crying. It was God's songs, and people were singing. He looked around. He was in a good place. They understood God. God understood them. He said when the people left, they didn't go drinking. They didn't go take drugs. Didn't fight each other, beat each other up, didn't do things wrong to each other. He said that was that God's language is love. It surpasses everything. One day we're going to all unite in the prophecies, our native prophecies, and we're all going to speak God's language. We're all going to be one with God again. It's going to happen someday. They say that it's going to get so bad that there's going to be just like little seeds. There's not going to be much left for us. Like this winter time. He talked about this winter time. That little seed is underneath the earth right now. But there's going to be that light that's going to come and it's going to grow. And he said the native people call that the flowering seed. It's going to turn into flowers, and it's going to go all over the world. We have a ceremony, the native ceremony. It's in Europe now. It's in China. It's in Russia. It's in Australia. It's in South America. It's all over the world. It's almost that time. That flower's growing all over the world now. They said once that flower grows all over the world, that's the beginning of the end. Then the world's going to change to the way it's supposed to be. We're pretty close to that time. So, like in our recovery's like that. We have to die to ourselves. We have to die to that alcohol. We have to die to that drugs. We have to let grandfather and all of life inside us, live in us. Like our native people get well at home, they will have a native religion called the Washit, or the Shaker Church, or the Waskliki. And those people go to those and they stay well because they're in contact with God, they're learning His ways of life again and how to follow them. But that's what helped me the most to get through my, keeping me sober, because I was so bad that I couldn't stop on my own. I really couldn't. I tried for years and years and years. From the time I found out I was alcoholic at 21, 22 years old, till I was like 38, 39 years old. I would just battle it and battle it and battle it. When I'd go 1 week, I thought, gee, I'm doing great, but I really wasn't, So that struggle, I thought, well, maybe I'm just going to die. And I can tell you that I'm part Jewish and I'm part Chinese too, besides Native American. And on the Jewish side, I like to read the Bible. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ. I got baptized when I was 9 years old, when I was a kid. And your soul reaches out for these ancestors, this life that formed you, made you when you were young. A lot of us don't know that, but that Oriental one, I wanted to search that out too. And the only way I could come in contact with that was through martial art. I met a guy that trained with people over in Japan. Then he introduced me to those different faiths, different groups, and those different ways of styles of fighting. But they're all beliefs in God too. All those things go back to those beliefs in God. And that's what helped me to stop drinking. It's like I read up and I prayed about it because I wanted to really stop drinking. But in the Jewish people, they stop drinking when they're between 38 and 42 years old. They could drink, and just like that, it goes away. They don't drink no more. They don't want to drink anymore. And then the other one was my native ways of the sweat lodge. I had a person that told me that if you give all of your prayers to them stone people, all of life is in there, everything. If you give it to them and you pray that way and you keep putting that sweetgrass on there and you keep inhaling that, it'll take over your body. One day that alcohol is not even your body's not ever going to want that alcohol. It'll kick it out of your system. It won't want to be there. Then the other man came that I was telling you about, that went to that ceremony where he speaks God's language. He even sings those songs. Other tribal people sing their tribal songs in ceremonies, but he's the only one who sings like that. He sings in God's language. Nobody understands it, but him and God, they know that. But that was the other one that healed me. It's like it all happened in the same year. Just all, grandfather blessed me and took all those that alcoholism, that drug addiction away from me. I thought I was going to die drinking, taking drugs, and living that miserable life. And you people that drink and take drugs, you know how miserable that gets. It's a miserable way to live, huh? Terrible. Just get bad. But I'm thankful today that grandfather done that for me, that he took those away from me. Because when that man come out of that ceremony, he told me, from this day forward, he tapped me on the back, and I still could feel it right here sometimes, like an opening in my back. It felt like lightning going through my body. But I turned around, he turned me around, he says, 12 months from now, you're going to turn around a complete circle, and you're going to look at grandfather, and you're not going to ever want drugs in your life again, never want alcohol in your life again, and you're going to walk that way the rest of your life. But that's what that sweat lodge done to me, that's what that teepee ceremony done to me, and that's what that Jewish faith done to me. The Jewish people, the hereditary in their families. But I'm thankful to God for that to this day, you know, and dedicate the rest of my life to helping people, try to be a mentor for them to get into recovery and stay that way, you know. Even if, like me, even if it's one day at a time, you know, they give me thousands of chances, maybe millions, I don't know. I was a pretty pitiful person that way. But thank you for listening.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I wanted to point out we have some signs up on the wall. So if you're interested in youth programs, if you just want to put your email under that. If you're interested in recovery programs, put your email under that. And then the somatic program, or a program on prosperity and corporate culture transformation. These are some of the programs we're talking about for 2023. So yeah. And did you have anything you wanted to say, Greg? Thank you to our board, to all of you for sharing your stories. We so appreciate each and every one of you for making SriPonya who we are today.
Yeah, it's just thank you guys so much. And the beautiful thing about the folks that are sitting up front is they're not here just as advisors. They have chosen to roll up their sleeves and get busy and walk alongside of us and have invited us to walk alongside them to do as great a work as we can here in Central Oregon. And you know, it begins today. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all.